And next up, we have the winner of the transport category, Grimshaw.
So this morning, we'd like to talk about the line-wide design on the Elizabeth line. And for those that don't know it, this is a new railway running on a combination of existing and new infrastructure across Greater London. The presentation is going to focus on the 10 new stations within central London. Now, each of these stations had its own design team, including a well-known architect, an engineer, and they were tasked with integrating these stations seamlessly within their environments and their local context. But the client also wanted a coherent line-wide identity across the passenger experience. And really, that's where our role came in. And it left us with the first challenge, which is actually to work out who's designing what. And we looked to the engineering, actually, for inspiration. And I think, the size of these caverns, the trains on the Elizabeth line are over 240 meters long. And it means that these huge caverns, actually, when you emerge from below ground, you actually come up to eastern and western ticket holes, which are in different locations within the City of London. And it felt only appropriate that these station ticket holes should reflect that unique context and celebrate it. But as you get below ground, the requirements become much more similar, and therefore the line-wide identity becomes much stronger the closer you get to the trains. And that really set the brief for us as a team to design the tunneled environments. And for that, we took inspiration again from the engineering. We were really kind of captivated by these heroic spaces, and we wanted to capture as much of that for the passenger. But also, speaking to the engineers, this spray concrete lining was the engineering methodology, which we saw as providing a real benefit to passengers. It allowed us to curve the junctions between tunnels, which effectively means passengers could see round corners. It gives very clear sight lines, makes the tunnel environments much safer, and it really creates this effortless flow from one space to another. We started to layer on top of that a lighting strategy which uses indirect uplighting within these primary spaces to make them feel generous and uplifting. But we layered over the top of that warm color temperature, which we contrast with the spaces in between. They're smaller in scale. We use direct lighting with a cool color temperature. And it's about sort of moving away from that uniformity you sometimes get in transport spaces and really trying to bring something which is much more, it brings a variety but also makes that journey more intuitive. Another key aspect of our role was around standardization, because just from a passenger point of view, if one station's presented in a familiar way from one station to the next, it just makes the system easier to use and less stressful. But actually, from a practical point of view, we were able to work with the engineers to standardize the tunnels from 80 different tunnel sections down to 7, which when you get to the cladding details, things like these complex three-dimensional curved corners, we can reuse the molds many times, and that brings the economic viability of the solution. It just makes it easier to realize. But similarly, we tried to create a sense of order within the stations, and all of the servicing equipment that often gets scattered around, we compressed it onto some really hard-working technology elements, such as the platform-edge screen here, which integrates everything from ventilation to lighting to customer information, speakers, cameras, into a really hard-working service wall, which is designed with self-finished materials, hinged access. It's about designing for long life. It's making these shorter life elements that need to be replaced regularly over the life of the project. It makes it easy to replace from low level. And we employed that approach right through the passenger journey. So for instance, within the escalator spaces, there's the opportunity, again, bring all the lighting down to low level, which means that these elements can be maintained without erecting scaffolding and disrupting the operations. But similarly, within the central concourses, we took on board the Charles Holden idea of this lighting totem and actually really tried to update it and made it as hardworking as possible, integrating everything from speakers, cameras, lighting, signage, which together with the end walls provides all the servicing needs of that space and keeps the surrounding architecture very calm and clutter-free. Now, all of that effort was not just about thinking about the long-term access and maintenance, it was thinking about the passenger experience, and particularly wayfinding. When a passenger steps off a train, you know, they have a critical decision to make, which is, which exit am I going to? If they get that wrong, they have a very long walk at street level. And so the architecture was, in part, in service to that need. And that's why we kept that back wall extremely calm for the color branding of the TfL signage to guide people to the right exit. Conversely, for departing passengers, you know, they really want to know when the train is coming. We've got real-time information above the doors, and then other information such as advertising, etc., bringing a bit of color and vibrancy to the space, but without distracting the passengers coming off the train.
So I'll look at how we implemented that. So we started off with a process of mock-ups. This is essentially a stage set built by a theatre company to enable us to start to talk to stakeholders and client about what that would look like. And we moved from that into prototyping. The fact that we were doing so many stations and were able to standardize components meant that we had a huge opportunity to do a lot more work on developing things with manufacturers and exploring exactly how each component would work, how it could be maintained, right down to what happens in bomb blast, cleaning, and maintenance. That also enabled us to think really carefully about how much material we were using. That level of standardization enabled us to minimize waste and make it as much as possible prefabricated, which was really helpful for installation in such a constrained environment. And also, we were able to anticipate some changes in technology over a long life project. So at the beginning, the client was expecting to be using fluorescent lighting in this. Clearly we didn't. We wanted to use LEDs and digital advertising, but actually it took a long while to get a relatively conservative client into that position. Alongside those practical considerations, we were also looking at things like the client's art program. So there's integrated art at every station, which uses a local artist commissioned with a local gallery. Here at Whitechapel, we've got Chantal Joff's work installed in one of our standard poster frames as part of the system. So I'll just quickly run you through some pictures of how all that results. So you can see here the two different ticket halls on the left that Neil referred to here at Farringdon. So one architect doing two different ticket halls in two locations. This is how the materials from below start to emerge at street level at Bond Street, bringing in bronze with the station architect there. And how we move from the box forms of the ticket halls into the underground system where there are circular shapes and how that sort of trumpet shape is interpreted at each station. And then right into the underground where you've got this sort of characteristic style for the platform spaces and the concourses that we've set up for the line-wide identity. And you can see here the lighting effects that Neil was talking about. And as a quick video there to illustrate that a lot of the life and here is about people movement. These can be very busy stations. We've got large numbers of passengers. So we're keen to create a very calm environment that is enlivened by all this movement of people and trains. And you can see in the next image, perhaps quite clearly, that difference in warm and cool lighting that Neil spoke of earlier on. Right through into the side passages that connect the concourse to the platforms, in this case with direct lighting. And because this is then applied across so many stations, there are some really interesting little incidents. So this is part of the tunnels at Tottenham Court Road, where to get around obstructions underground, we've got these twisting corridors, and you get these nice glimpses through the station. And finally, down to the platform environment. These are built by two completely different contractors, but one of the big advantages of the work that we did with the client to standardize all these components is that from the passenger point of view, you've got no idea that these are two different contractors. You've got a very consistent feel. It's also been able to be adapted to a curved platform there at Tottenham Court Road. And that was achieved through really rigorous attention to detail, which enabled us to achieve this result through a long and, as I'm sure you can imagine, complex process on site. And that's our last image. Thank you.
Peter, you mind if I start first? Right. Thank you for the presentation. That was very good. I'm not going to ask you any questions because I've got to make a little bit of a declaration. I was one of the engineers for one of the stations in the early days, so I'm not going to ask any questions. I'm going to excuse myself from that.
Should we head this way? Yeah. Congratulations. I think it's incredibly well integrated and thought through. Really, it's a multi-kilometre product design, I think, almost, more than an architecture. Having worked on some underground train stations, I know how complex they are, and fire and acoustics and many things you haven't mentioned all have incredibly strong impact on the design. So to end up with something so resolved and calm and beautiful, I think is an amazing effort. Congratulations.
Yeah, congratulations for the project. Yeah, I was wondering, I mean, it's strange that we are still kind of building tunnels to make metro. So I would like to, to hear about your thoughts. I think that from the engineering point of view, especially the first images that you show about the tunnels and about also the technology on finding these panels, etc. From architectural point of view, I think is great. Well, I would like to understand a bit more the broader context. This is London, yeah? So in London, you are still making metro lines? Yeah, well, you were pioneers, so somehow maybe you will... so I don't know what is the broader discussion about making more metro stations, I would say.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. And the Elizabeth line is quite a new mode for the UK, actually. It's heavy rail, so these are very long trains that run at high speeds. But they run at a metro-style service, so 16 trains an hour, up to 24 trains an hour. It's an incredible achievement, and the scale of those trains means for the majority of the sites you have to tunnel, yeah, because you don't have the land availability within an established city like London. There's only 2 stations could be built as boxes. That's Woolwich Station and Paddington Station, where there was enough land at street level where you could build it in a more traditional box construction. So the other stations under the city had to be tunneled, and that's where the whole sort of idea of this spray concrete lined mine caverns became the safest, quickest, most efficient way of achieving that.
I think the other thing that's worth saying is the way this has transformed the geography of the city. By linking existing railway lines on the east and the west, it's made parts of the wealthier parts of the city centre much more accessible from some of the less wealthy, more deprived areas in the east. So it's part of an overall change. London's development has been moving east for a while because that's where the land's available, and this has really sort of accelerated that. It's added about 10% capacity to the overall ability to get around London on the train network.
Speaking as a local, I can merely report to a lot of people here who probably haven't been to London recently that it's immensely popular. Everybody reports on it as being quantum different in experience from previous. And, we have 4 or 5 generations of underground railways, which we use. And I think the thing for me that was the most interesting and most important was this thing about the corners. I have for long, this is a personal, had this love for rounded corners, not because they're sort of sexy, but because they give you a different view of movement and looking, just the points that you made. And you've done it so well. And then you incorporate this sort of color thing. So that I think that, to me, that was really, in a funny way, it's a very simple thing. Also the fact that, I'm of the generation where for the first 20 years of my experience of building consciously, everything had to be, you know, minimal. Hotel lobbies were minimal, stations were minimal. Everything, you're always, like here, there's a death trap behind me, by the way, but I was brought up with death trap situations where it's pared down to such a tiny dimension, but it just gets by. And this, you have had the liberty, or however it came about, of having generous spaces, and then you have this curving away of sight, so that I'm naturally slightly claustrophobic, and it avoids that claustrophobia. And it seems a trite thing, you know. Okay, so they did nice corners, and you can go around them, but believe me, in the 4 or 5 generations of undergrounds, they never bothered before about that. You might have Palazzi or somebody just decorating a space, but that didn't really help that much. And this, I think, is significant. And all I can say, I'm a bit local there because, you know, Nick Grimshaw was even a student of mine. So I'm in danger of being sort of family or partisan or something. But everybody loves it. That I can report. Foreign, local, tall, short, they all love the line. What more can you say?
Could I ask a question, which is, I wondered if you might say something about the relationship that you then had with these multiple architecture teams. Were you able to simply, as it were, set out the format of what you'd done and they work within it? Or did it involve you in discussion, especially where individual problems on individual stations might arise?
Yeah, look, this was a really key part, actually, of the delivery of the project. It was very unique, where we had a collaboration, really, across multiple architects, you know, which, as you can imagine, at the outset, there was a few barriers put up. There was, you know, it's understandable people want to be territorial around their scope and to try and take ownership of things, but actually, through a really early set of collaborative workshops, there was, you know, some of these diagrams emerged, you know, the idea of actually these stations are big enough that you could have quite, you know, a unique approach to identity within stations. Normally you have either line-wide identity or, you know, individual identity, one or the other. This does both, and I think all of us kind of saw the benefit of that, you know, and actually worked together. And over the last 10 years, it's been a really, really positive collaboration across the architectural profession, which I think, you know, was perhaps one of the most enjoyable and rewarding aspects of the project.
Thank you very much.